Hey, I'm Nathaniel. So today I wanted to talk about the album Neighborhoods by blink-182, and I wanted to make the somewhat unpopular case that Neighborhoods is actually their best album and is even better than the untitled or self-titled album and Enema of the State. So first, just some quick context on this album. It was the first album after blink-182 broke up in 2005, which was in part due to the members' differing priorities, and then got back together in 2009, which was soon after Travis Barker almost died in a plane crash. During this time, the band were not communicating very well, and Tom DeLonge and Mark Hoppus were mainly only communicating through their managers. And so overall, it seems their reunion was kind of fragile, and this almost certainly affected the making of the album. As their longtime producer, Jerry Finn, had unfortunately died not too long before, the band ultimately decided to produce the album themselves and decided to make most of the album while not in the same room, instead communicating mostly over email, and the album was delayed several times before it finally came out on September 27th, 2011. Also, just to be clear, there's a standard version of the album with only 10 tracks and a deluxe version of the album with 14 tracks. And for this review, I'm choosing to talk about the deluxe version, mainly because I'm a fan of the deluxe version songs and didn't want to leave them out of the review, and also because many fans also seem to prefer to think about the album within the context of the deluxe version. So the common story that I typically hear among fans about Neighborhoods, at least fans on the internet, is that it was certainly an album that had potential and does have some decent songs on it, but mainly because it was written, recorded, and produced differently from their past albums, which affected its sound, with less than stellar production quality and sounding too much like Angels and Airwaves or Plus 44 rather than classic Blink. All of this resulted in a more or less average album from Blink that could have been better. Though I should note that fan perception of the album has improved somewhat over time, probably partly due to this being their last album with Tom, at least until One More Time came out. And this album probably came off looking better to fans when compared to the lesser-liked subsequent albums with Maskiba, California, and Nine. It's also true that the album did not perform very well commercially, debuting at number 2 on the Billboard 200 but quickly falling off the chart soon after. And Neighborhoods has been one of the band's lowest selling albums overall. And it's also true that even the band themselves generally don't hold the album in very high regard. And the main reason they cite is the previously mentioned recording process, which was so different for them, where they weren't writing with each other in the same room, and their difficulty managing the creative differences among the members on the album, where Tom seemed to want to push the band in a new atmospheric and synthier direction, while Mark and Travis preferred something a little closer to Blink's classic, more punk-influenced sound. However, I believe, as I said before, that this is actually the band's best album, and I'll admit I'm a little bit biased, partly because when this album came out, I was an angsty teenager who was forced to move to a different state for the first time, and this album really resonated with me at the time, although it's also grown on me as I've gotten older, possibly because some of its themes have continued to connect with me more so than some of the earlier stuff by the band. And also, just in general, while I do like both, I am a bit partial to the more dark and serious side of Blink rather than the jokey and fun side. But trying to speak a little more objectively about the album, whatever that means, I would argue that despite what we know about the making of the album, Neighborhoods is actually surprisingly consistent and cohesive in its overall sound, as many of the songs on Neighborhoods have a similar mood and atmosphere, and the lyrics are fairly consistently pessimistic and depressing, often using dark imagery and dealing with themes such as death and loss. And it seemed like it was not a coincidence that these dark lyrics followed multiple personal tragedies for the band in a short time period, with Travis's plane crash and the deaths of Jerry Finn and DJ AM. And in addition, blink-182 had already successfully experimented with a darker overall sound on their Untitled album, and it seems like Neighborhoods was a continuation of that, as well as a nice progression from Untitled, adding in some synthesizers here and there, and also incorporating some post-punk, arena rock, and even progressive rock influences. And personally, I think it's great when bands experiment with timbre and instrumentation, and I feel like the Neighborhoods was one of their most experimental albums in this regard, along with Untitled, of course. And some examples of this on Neighborhoods are some of the more sonically experimental songs like Snake Charmer, Fighting the Gravity, and the Heart's All Gone interlude, the latter which reminds me somewhat of the interlude by Plus 44, but is a better fit sonically for the album, in my opinion, than the interludes on Untitled. And just personally, it's easily my favorite interlude the band has ever done. And I would also include Love is Dangerous on this list, which, despite being one of the band's least liked songs, is actually one of my favorite songs by them, as I think it effectively blends atmospheric synths and interesting dual vocals in the verses. Furthermore, although this is the case with most of Blink's albums, I think that Neighborhoods has plenty of catchy melodies, great guitar riffs, and great drumming, of course. And I think that even if the album does drift somewhat from the band's original pop-punk sound, although there are a handful of songs on the album that are closer to the earlier Blink sound, and also provide some nice contrast and balance to the rest of the album, such as the punk-influenced and energetic but still thematically dark Heart's All Gone, the album in general is still very effective in covering the basics of the band's overall sound, and also expanding on them in interesting ways through its mood, themes, and experimentation. I do believe, however, that Up All Night was perhaps not the greatest choice for a lead single for the album, as I feel like like it's kind of lacking in the chorus somewhat, and that After Midnight, the other single from the album, had kind of a bland chorus with an uninteresting hook, though I do really like Tom's parts of the song. And in addition, the decision to make almost every bridge of every song an instrumental was, in my opinion, a bit of a missed opportunity, as I feel like it didn't really add a whole lot to the songs and felt a bit formulaic, and it also made the songs kind of drag somewhat in the latter half and lose some of their energy. Overall, I rate this album a 9 out of 10. I think it's a very consistent album with a number of great and memorable songs on it that effectively blend elements of the classic Blink sound with newer and interesting sounds to varying degrees, like Ghosts on the Dance Floor, Natives, After Midnight, Even If She Falls, and even Love is Dangerous, which personally are some of my all-time favorite songs by the band, while overall the album is a great progression for the band even if it can feel lacking and formulaic on occasion. So although it's close, this is personally my favorite Blink-182 album, although I do also like the Untitled album a lot for similar reasons, and Neighborhoods is also just one of my all-time favorite albums in general. Alright, well, thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to my channel, and also please leave a comment if you'd like to share your own thoughts about the album or about Blink-182, whether you agree or disagree with me and why, and or how you feel it compares to their other albums. Well, that's it for me. Thanks again, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.